Israel. But first, President Trump campaigned as a deal maker. The next 2 weeks are a test of those abilities. Congress has a deadline this Friday to pass a spending bill. There's also pressure from Democrats and some Republicans to extend legislative protections for Dreamers before the holiday recess. And the tax bill passed the Senate and House, but faces a delicate process as the chambers reconcile the two bills. On top of all that, the White House faces new questions about contacts with Russian officials. For insight into how Mr. Trump is approaching this key moment in his presidency, I spoke with two men who were there for key moments in his campaign. Corey Lewandowski was the president's first campaign manager. He served until just before the Republican National Convention. David Bossie was deputy campaign manager in the final weeks of the general election and advised the transition. They are co-authors of Let Trump Be Trump, the inside story of his rise to the presidency. I sat down with them Tuesday when the book came out to talk about the campaign and Mr. Trump's approach to key negotiations ahead. But we started with the Russia investigation. CBS News confirms that the president's former national security advisor, Michael Flynn, discussed his contacts with Russian officials with other transition advisors, including KT McFarland. There are new questions about what McFarland, who has since left the White House, knew. I asked Bossie about that. Russia continues to be a cloud hanging over the Trump administration. And David, I want to ask you, you were involved in the transition during the time when KT McFarland spoke to Michael Flynn about contact with Russian officials. Can you just give us a sense, how would that have worked? Because we're seeing stories now, as you know, that are centering in on that time frame. So can you give us a sense of that
Certainly.
Process?
It's quite simple. General Flynn created his national security team, and they were segregated away from the political guys, from the rest of us. We would see them around, but you didn't interact with them. The transition's a big operation. The national security team really took, I would say, 2 big conference rooms over that were across the hall from each other, and simply you would walk by them, but you wouldn't know what was going on in there.
Corey, let me ask you, Carter Page told Congress about an email that he says he sent you seeking permission to visit Moscow after he was invited to speak in July of 2016. What's your recollection now of that? What do you remember about that?
Carter Page was asking permission from me to go and give a commencement speech at the same exact location Barack Obama had provided a commencement speech as President of the United States in 2009 in Russia. Number one. Number two, Carter Page didn't work for the campaign. And what I said very specifically in my email is, you do not work for or represent the candidate. So you can do whatever you want to do, but please do not pretend that you're going there on behalf of the campaign. I think people forget that.
Well, George Papadopoulos also reportedly informed you about Russian officials wanting to set up a meeting with your campaign in the Kremlin. What's your understanding of why they approached you think, for this?
Well, look, I think what George Papadopoulos did, and again, you have to put this in context, is he came to us and said, I have Greek officials who want to meet, I have Israeli officials who want to meet, I have Russian officials who want to meet, I have Saudi officials who want to meet. I am a world-known entity, is the way he portrayed himself. I was the head of the campaign. But George Papadopoulos didn't report to me. He worked through a separate entity in Washington, D.C. He worked with separate individuals. And again, he was not an employee of the campaign and had no direct involvement in the campaign other than, again, being part of a very small advisory committee that met one time.
Let me ask you both, have either of you been in touch with the Special Counsel's office?
Nope.
No, and look, I'll be happy to be. All of the things that took place basically took place after I left. And what I've said is, if Bob Mueller or anybody else wants to talk, I'll be happy to, because if anybody colluded or cooperated with Russia to impact the outcome of an election, I want that person to go to jail for the rest of their lives.
Well, as you know, a number of key campaign players have come up in Mueller's investigation. Why do you think that you haven't been contacted?
Look, I don't know what Bob Mueller is going to do, but what I do know is this. I have nothing to hide. Dave has nothing to hide. And if we can shed light on anything, great. But here, let me put Mr. Mueller's investigation into context. When he indicted Paul Manafort and Rick Gates, those are for improprieties that were done a decade ago when they were working in Kiev and Russia and all those other places, and those were financial improprieties that had nothing to do with the campaign. That's very clear. The two individuals who have pled guilty to crimes have been pled guilty to crimes of lying to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. That's a felony. They didn't lie about collusion or cooperation. They lied to an FBI agent. That's a felony, and they're accountable for that. But it has nothing to do with the outcome of a campaign. It's very important to put that in context.
You want to say something, David?
No, I think that's right. Look, we don't, we're outsiders on this thing. You ask why I haven't been contacted. I think it's clear that my position on the campaign, my position in the transition, I didn't have any contact with anyone. From my own personal recollection, I don't have access to my email because it's a closed-down campaign, but somebody does. I didn't get any emails from anybody related to Russia. I was there for the last 10 weeks of the campaign. I never crossed paths with Paul Manafort. Don't even know who George Papadopoulos is at all. Never met him. My tenure was there. I was in the general election. I was into the debate prep, the debates, and winning a general election.
What do you understand, David, to be the parameters of Robert Mueller's investigation?
You know, that's a great question. I don't know that anybody really knows anymore, because what it seems that Mueller has initially done, or initially was supposed to do, was about Russian collusion. And so it's a little frustrating. Look, don't get me wrong. Did Mike Flynn make a mistake, and did he do something wrong in when he was talking to the FBI? Absolutely. That doesn't mean that there was collusion. It's a fantasy. It really is.
So based on what we do know, do you think that Mueller has overstepped the bounds of this investigation?
I don't look at the investigation and say it makes it's a natural nexus. But when people lie to the FBI, they go and they put pressure on them to try to get additional information. I think that's what they've done with General Flynn. But whether he's outside of his zone, I think it's getting a little far afield.
It can't go on in perpetuity. So there should be a time frame that says if it's a 12-month investigation, an 18-month investigation, at some point a report has to be drawn up and prepared to the people to say, we've concluded or not concluded, we're going to move forward. That's a fair and reasonable thing to do, and I think that time frame needs to come fairly soon. So
should President Trump remove him?
No, I think you have to give Robert Mueller and his team the opportunity right now to finalize this, but there has to be a parameter to what they can or should be doing, and what that means is a time frame and a cost associated with it. Now, if you come back and you find something, of course it gets to continue, but it doesn't get to just go on in perpetuity forever.
The president is meeting this week, as you know, with Democratic leaders Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. Breitbart News called his meeting with them earlier this fall an amnesty fiasco. Do you think, David, that his base would permit a deal on Dreamers?
Well, we're a long way from any deal. Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, just abdicated their responsibilities just this week when they failed to show up to a meeting at the White House. The president had to have a meeting with the House and Senate leadership, and they didn't attend. It's hard to make deals with people who don't want to deal with you. And so the president, just a couple of months ago made a deal on the debt ceiling and moved it with Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi's agreement. And I thought that maybe, just maybe, they would see the light that, hey, maybe there can be some deals made. Maybe we can get America, working again together. But it seems that unless it is their way, they aren't going to agree with this president. And so this president has said, the American people have spoken.
But on the issue of Dreamers specifically, the president has expressed sympathy for Dreamers. So again, I ask, is the base, you think, would they be accepting of any kind of deal when it comes to Dreamers?
I don't work in hypotheticals. I look at political calculations of these things.
But there was already a negative backlash when it was reported that the president was considering that.
We will see what kind of deal is struck in the next couple of months. I think, if the president doesn't get a wall, okay, which promises made and promises kept are a theme in our book. And, we're frustrated for the president that he's not had the kind of success he's used to, because he's a guy who wants to move very quickly, and he wants success, and he wants the American people to see that he can get things done, that Washington isn't broken anymore. And they just see continuously, whether it's Kate Steinle's verdict or a broken FBI agent, it seems, that justice will not be served. So the American people are frustrated, and I'm frustrated along with them.
David, you were on the campaign when the Access Hollywood tape came out. Was there any question at the time that was Donald Trump on the video?
Well, we say, and we outline in Let Trump Be Trump extensively, the Billy Bush weekend. And we talk about, I showed on my iPad, it happened to be my iPad, Hope Hicks got it from the Washington Post, and I happened to play it. But it's the president steps off the bus. The president is voiced with Billy Bush. My position is we wouldn't even be talking about this if in the last several weeks men around the country, whether it's in Hollywood or here in New York or in Washington, whether it's in politics or in the media, weren't wrapped up in just a sea of activity by them that is now trying to wash over on the president. I think it's unfair to him, but it is the day and age we live in. So we have to, we look around and we say we wouldn't even be talking about this. We could get to the important issues of the day. But what is going on in the world today with all of these accusations, whether it's Al Franken or Conyers, it's an important conversation to have.